To further sort of complement and a little bit more on Japan's flood risk management experience, I want to turn to Yuka Makino to introduce our expert panel and then also to moderate a discussion to bring in our experts from around the region. Dr. Makino is a senior operations officer in the Tokyo DRM hub, as Yasu mentioned. She has more than 10 years of operational experience in developing and managing World Bank programs in the areas of natural resource management, land management, and disaster risk management, and climate change adaptation, including country experience in East Asia, South Asia, and Africa. Prior to joining the World Bank, Dr. Makino served as UNDP Program Officer in Cambodia and as a JICA expert on community-based disaster management in Nepal. So I'd like to turn the floor over to Dr. Makino to introduce our expert panel and to moderate a dialogue with our experts and counterparts in the cities that are connected around Asia. Over to you, Yuka.
Thank you, Phil. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists or discussants here from the Government of Japan. We have representatives from the Government of Japan, the Ministry of Finance, and from the, as you know already, the Ministry of Land, Information and Technology and Tourism. We also have from the Japan Meteorological Association, and then we have from other agencies like ICHARM. ICHARM is the International Center for Water Hazard and Risk Management. We also have representatives from the city of Yokohama, who can give you a comprehensive understanding of the institutional arrangement, and from JICA, who also have experience in implementing programs in the field. So I also like to thank all the people in the field who've sent in their questions beforehand. Your questions have been shared, so I hope in the first half of our discussion, we can give answers to those questions. And then the second half, I hope we can also go around the country VCs, country offices again. And if you have any follow-up questions that you'd like to have answered after the discussants have given their responses to your questions, I think our questions that you've raised and sent us earlier can be divided into three large sections. One of the key questions all of you asked was, urban flood management is complicated. You've got lots of different sectors, from economic growth, you have to consider demographic changes, urbanization, climate change, institutional capacity policy. So how is it that you can integrate all of it to do proper flood management in the urban areas? What is the institutional mechanism involved? How do you do the planning? So I'd like to ask Ms. Uchiyama from the city of Yokohama, who can give us her experience and how they do it in the city of Yokohama.
Thank you very much, Mr. Makino. May I speak in Japanese? はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you for your introduction. At the city of Yokohama, let me briefly introduce the city of Yokohama. We have a population of 3.7 million. So Yokohama City is the second largest city, only after Tokyo. In terms of area, we have 435 square kilometers, and in terms of population density, it's 8,500 per square kilometers. And annual precipitation is approximately 1,700 millimeters. And within Yokohama City, there are 58 rivers flowing through the city of Yokohama. And the total length is approximately 215 kilometers. In terms of urbanization rate, it's 7% is the urbanization rate. So it is highly urbanized city. We have a basic DRM Act. And based on this act, we have measures and plans based on this act, and prevention and countermeasures and reconstruction measures are in place in order to minimize the damage. And in terms of prevention, we have river improvements, and as was explained by our expert earlier on, there are different classes of rivers. There are rivers the country is in charge of the city, and the prefectures are in charge of different classes of rivers. In terms of Yokohama City, in terms of our target, 50 millimeters of precipitation per hour should be resisted by rivers within Yokohama City. The urban plan has been completed for the city of Yokohama. Therefore, the measures that we can implement from now on is to widen the width of the river and retention ponds, building retention ponds. These are the two key measures for the Yokohama City to implement. Basic administrative units like Yokohama City has a major role to play in providing necessary information to the resident of a community. Meteorological Agency of Japan issues a prediction of precipitation, and based on this information, we try to notify the local residents. And from peacetime, we have published a hazard map, which was produced by the city of Yokohama, and we have inundation prediction area, which was designated by the city of Yokohama, and this information has also been published for the purpose of preparedness amongst the community residents. For the citizens of the city of Yokohama, we have published a hazard map, which was put together by the city of Yokohama, and disaster management, risk management. We have community-based organizations, and we have been conducting DRM drills so that there will be a level of preparedness amongst the citizens of the city of Yokohama. Thank you.
Would you like to add anything, Tachi-san, from the Ministry of Land Information Technology?
Thank you very much. As I mentioned in the presentation before, we have the river management system or river manager system in Japan, who's responsible for managing rivers. But actually, the river manager cannot reach out to each and every houses or resident. So that is why we take the roles, share the roles with the responsible entities, including the river managers. River managers is responsible for giving information, basic information like the flood discharge, water level, and so on. And the information is given to prefecture and also municipalities, and municipalities are responsible to give the information to the residents. So that kind of sharing and sharing of the responsibilities and roles makes the system work in Japan. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone from JICA like to contribute?
Following Mr. Tachi's comment on the river management system, as far as I observed, in many developing countries, actually river management system is not established. Basically, water use for agriculture and drinking water supply, it has a high priority, and flood control has low priority. So that means often the case, Ministry of Agriculture has much information on river water flows, but actually just water flow data is very limited. Thank you.
One of the key questions that were raised was also how different agencies coordinate in Japan, because of course we've got the city government, municipal government, we've got the Ministry of Land Infrastructure and Tourism, transport, all the different agencies. Can anyone share their experience of how Japan does the coordination between different agencies?
Thank you very much. My name, this is Tachi from the Ministry of Land Infrastructure and Transport. That's the core issue of the addressing the urban flood issues. Actually, it's quite difficult to coordinate between the different agencies. So we're trying to establish a system, but I think we are on our way to, actually completely implement in an ideal way. But one of the things we had, one of the messages we had in the presentation was, in the 80s, we introduced so-called comprehensive flood control measures to incorporate lots of stakeholders. But we've been doing that for more than nearly 20 years. But some difficulties was appeared, for example, to legally bind the measures, like the setting up the storage ponds when developing areas. So the reason why we introduced the new law in 2004 was to legally bind such activities. And it's not only done by the river managers, but some parts are done by the municipal government, and also some are done by prefecture governments and so on. So we've been trying to establish a clear definition of roles and responsibilities of each and every stakeholder. That's what we are trying to do.
Sounds excellent. Thank you so much. I'd like to move on to the second set of questions that were raised by the different country offices. The second set were concerning non-structural measures. So the first part was on modeling. What kind of flood models does Japan use? What kind of hazard mapping do they use? And what is available for developing countries out there that they can also use? There was also, maybe some of you can share, and how do you assess the economic impact of urban floods and how reliable your interventions are when you're deciding what interventions to do in your urban areas? And so that's the first part of the non-structural measure. The second part is contingency planning, early warning systems, and forecasting systems. What exists in Japan? How do you forecast? How do you set up your early warning system? So I'd like to start with the first part of modeling hazard mapping. Perhaps Ohara-san from iCharm could intervene.
So I would like to share the Japanese experience. In Japan, emirate or each prefecture or local governments are conducting flood inundation simulation and distributing hazard map for the local people. So nowadays, flood modeling software are distributed for as a free software. So I think some of the country can use that kind of open source flood modeling software for making an inundation simulation model. So as for iCharm, our research center is also distributing the flood modeling software, and it is also available for your country. But before the modeling, one important thing is the understanding the urban flood characteristic in your region. That is most important before making model. So observation of your river discharge or precipitation or disaster and accumulating that kind of data is most important for developing your own region's model. That is the most important thing before making model. Then you can build the more precise and more high resolution flood model. With some return period. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The importance of data is definitely there. Tachi-san, would you like to say something about the non-structural measure, the modeling part, hazard mapping that Japan does?
Yes. I don't think it's up to me to explain about the actual use of hazard maps. I think it's mainly done by municipality government, but we are doing that with close relation with the local government. Okay, I like to emphasize one thing. Preparing hazard maps is just the beginning. It's not the completion of the works. Because lots of local residents cannot understand or feel the importance of the hazard maps. So in order to really make use of such measures, we have to do the repeated drills or training for evacuation or some educational activities, raising awareness and so on. So without such activities, hazard maps are only maps with colors. So that kind of activities really is important.
I agree. Awareness raising. I think Uchiyama-san from Yokohama mentioned how they use hazard maps. Could you share how you actually prepare them, who prepares them, and what goes into the preparation, and how you communicate to your communities?
はい。横浜市では
In the case of the city of Yokohama, there are three kinds of hazard maps. We have a flood hazard map. Second, we have inundation prediction hazard map. And hazard map with evacuation centers. Within the city of Yokohama, there are 18 wards, administrative wards, and we have hazard map of each of these 18 administrative wards, and these hazard maps are available on our homepage, webpage. Mr. Tachi earlier mentioned that just putting together a hazard map is not the end of the story. At the city of Yokohama, the water level of rivers, we have a gauge installed in 60 different locations within the city of Yokohama, and every 10 minutes, if necessary, the level of river water can be monitored, and the result of the monitoring is often published on our webpage. And asking our residents to look at the web page is not enough. Therefore, silent or the noise is emitted in order for us to let the residents know of the immediate danger.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm sure we can come back to this later if you have more questions on the details of hazard mapping. But I'd like to move on to the question of contingency planning, early warning system forecasting, and perhaps Mr. Tanaka Nobuyuki from the Japan Meteorological Agency can share what Japan does.
Thank you for introducing me. My name is Nobuyuki Tanaka of Japan Meteorological Agency, government body. So I'd like to share the information on our improvement of our flood forecasting. So in Japan, so in 2008, so we have one disaster by flood forecasting, urban flood. So in the Kobe city, Tuga River. So it is 2008. It's okay. So several years ago. So and 13 children were killed by this urban flood. So lesson learned from this disaster, we made two improvement of our services. One point is observation and forecast. And we conduct analyzed precipitation is mixed by the meteorological radar and rain gauges. And this is enhanced to the very short range forecasting up to the 6 hours from now. But we enhanced these systems by using X-band radar operated by the Ministry of Land Infrastructure and Transport, and we conducted the upgrading the meteorological radar system into the spatial resolution in 2 kilometers. 250 meters square. And we also conducted the numerical weather prediction system. This is a physical simulation by a supercomputer. And this spatial resolution is 2 kilometers. However, the enhancement of the observation and forecast needs a lot of times and budget. So the second point was awareness campaign. So the urban flood is it's a short time from rainfall and flood. So it is a short time to if you provide early warnings, but it is not effective for the flood forecast, urban flood. So we made various awareness campaign, such as making moving pictures and introducing to the website of JMA. And also we provide various lectures, such as school and other official lectures. So, okay, this is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else from our discussants who would like to share about either the hazard mapping, modeling, early warning system forecasting? At the community or municipal levels, how do you do the warning system? How does it work in Japan? I understand you get information from JMA and then it's communicated. I think it'll be very interesting for our colleagues in the country office to understand how this whole system works. Could one of you share? Okay, Tachi-san.
Actually, the flood warning system in Japan is done together, in cooperation of the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, who's in charge of river management, and also with JMA, who has the information on the meteorological side. So we are mandated to give information to other related organizations from the data, basic data acquired from the observation sites, like the rainfall and so on. So we get the data from JMA and analyze it to convert it to the water level or the prediction of water level. So based on that predicted water level, we give information like it's time to prepare for evacuating, or it's actually it's you have to evacuate right now, or it's not such a critical situation. Such kind of information is given to the prefecture government and other entities like the broadcasting companies and so on. Then each entities has their responsibilities to convey to the local residents through some mediums like the television and also some systems established in the municipalities. So such kind of collaborative system is done in Japan.
Excellent, thank you. So once the municipality receives information from the ministry, what actions does, for example, the city of Yokohama take once you receive the radar, rainfall and flood information from the ministry?
はい。いざという時にたくさんの雨
Well, if there is to be a lot of rainfall, then the city officials would know who is responsible to do what. We already beforehand identified who is responsible for what. How much rain, if there is to be that much rain, who is to gather where. That's already been predetermined. And as we heard from Mr. Tachi earlier, how much rainfall there is and which river's water level has risen by how much. That information I would get through my mobile phone. I would get that information directly on my mobile phone. We do have that arrangement. So when there's a lot of rainfall, the people who are designated to deal with that, they would look at the mobile phone information, and even if it is midnight or early morning, they would gather where they are designed to gather. We do have that mechanism in place.
How is that communicated to the communities?
Well, as Mr. Tachi mentioned earlier on, basically, the national government will use media, radio stations, and TV stations to notify the general public. In the case of the city of Yokohama, we published information on our webpage, but when push comes to shove, siren, the noise system, and we will send out automobiles so that they will use a speaker from the automobiles mobile to notify the residents to evacuate.
It's wonderful, thank you. I was just wondering, in your presentation, Tachi-san, you mentioned the Suibo system, and you said that's a community flood fighting mechanism. Can you explain that a little further, please?
Okay, the Suibo is a Japanese word, but I intentionally use the word Suibo because I like the system in Japan. It's a very important part of that makes the Japanese flood fighting system. Actually, Suibodan, or the flood fighting team or flood fighting community system, has been there for hundreds of years. Since when we had little infrastructure to actually physically avoid the flooding. So the local community people work together to fight against such flooding phenomena, like establishing the sandbags, piles of sandbags when flood comes to prevent the overtopping of levees, or sometimes to rescue people when flood comes. And such activities are done by the flood fighters or Suibou dam. So now we have modern technology to prevent flooding, like strong levees and dams and so on. But still have chances. We have the possibility of overtopping and levee breaks and so on. So still, such community system plays very important role in the Japanese flood risk management system. So that's why I, understand the importance of such system in Japan's system, and use the word Suibou.
So just to follow up, is that a community, they all just voluntarily decide to come together, or does someone organize them, or how is that done?
Actually, it's an established system all over Japan. Although it comes from a very origins very like community system. It's naturally they gather to protect their own assets and properties. But now it's established, and we have the special law for such activities called flood fighting law, and it's actually supports such activities, like giving some funds for the activities, and also they gather very frequently for drills in normal times to prepare for the flooding, and how they gather when such situation comes and so on. That's decided beforehand. So it's quite established system in Japan.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'd like to move on to the questions we had from the field concerning structural measures. There were questions on what technologies available, what advanced technologies. For Mongolia, we had advanced technologies on urban flood risk management using the green development approach to control flooding and reduce flooding. What river training and river management environment improvement technologies are available? Who would like to answer that? I was thinking Mr. Tanaka Yukio from JICA could possibly share his experience.
Dr. Makino, thank you for introduction. Oh, is it working? Okay. First, I'm Tanaka, another Tanaka on the table from JICA Disaster Management Team. And first of all, I'd like to emphasize that when we implement disaster flood control project in developing country, we try as much as possible not to introduce advanced technology, because flood control facilities are subject to destruction when disaster happens, and it very quick recovery is required. So those structural facilities should be made from materials or technologies locally available or accessible. But having said that, some of few exceptions is steel sheet pile for river wall instead of earth embankment. We adopted this material for Manila's flood control project, and with steel sheet pile, it's a substitute or alternative for embankment, and it can save the land necessary for the embankment because it's just like a wall. And that lasts for decades. So in this case, we judged it's applicable, and especially in developed cities like Manila, land available for river improvement is limited. So steel sheet pile is very useful. And another example is the underground floodway tunnel which was introduced in Mr. Tachi's presentation. And we haven't implemented project for underground floodway tunnel, not yet. But in megacities in Asia, maybe in near future that kind of structural measure will be useful. Thank you.
I'd just like to add to what Mr. Tanaka from JICA was saying. After this session is over, we'll upload a video of the Tokyo, in Tokyo we have the largest underground flood control measure infrastructure in the world. And there's a video that covers how that structure was built and how it works. And so we'll upload that in our Spark or this community of practice page so that you can actually have a look. It's only a 12-minute video, and it shows how it's a 6.3 kilometer infrastructure that's all underground, and it fills up when the rivers all flood. So you might be interested in looking at that, particularly Mongolia, because 2 of your questions were concerning advanced technology. So you can have a look at that. But I'd like to have Mr. Tachi also fill us in on less advanced, but stuff that will be relevant to our developing countries.
Well, when we're talking about the structural measures, non-structural measures, sometimes it can be said like both on contrary, or both contradict with each other and can't go together with that. But structural measures and non-structural measures, not something like that. It must be properly combined, and by combining structural and non-structural measures in a very suitable way for each catchment areas based on the characteristics of the catchment, it can give the right answer to address flooding. So, well, one of the ways we allocate the parts for structural measures and not structural measures to decide the limit of structural measures, like deciding the return period of protection done by the structural measures. It's sometimes like once in 10 years, once in 50 years, once in 100 years, and so on. Up to that scale, up to that limit, the structural measures definitely works. So give the very certain protection to the area. But we have still the possibility of the hazards over such scale. So in order to protect from such events, we have to prepare the non-structural measures. So even though we introduce structural measures, we still need non-structural measures. And both of them complement with each other. So the most important point of view when talking about the measures, both are very important, and both must be properly combined and introduced. That's my opinion.
Excellent sound advice. Thank you so much, Tachi-san. What I'd like to do is give a chance to go back to our country offices and see if there's anybody else who'd like to add or ask for clarification questions to the discussants over here. Perhaps we'll go to Sri Lanka first. Or not. Is there any country who'd like to start off with any questions? Maybe one question per country.
Let's start. Yes, we have a question from Beijing.
Beijing, excellent.
Okay. I have a questions on the hazard map, use of hazard map from the government point of view. Thank you. You have already mentioned about the ways of awareness to the community. But when we prepare the fancy hazard map, how to ensure the government will take into the decision process when they have the urban development, say don't to build those school or important buildings along the floodplain, how to ensure this institutional arrangement into the law itself.
Any other questions? I'd like to take the whole bunch first.
I actually have a question. If I could follow up on the institutional side, this concept of a river manager I thought is fascinating. But I asked, in China, for example, they have a river commission for the Yangtze or for the, so that's like a huge system. I want to understand a little bit better how the Japanese system works. Like, do they have a manager for the entire river system? That would be quite a job. So maybe a little bit more detail on how they actually function.
Any other country offices?
Sorry.
Yes, question from Jakarta.
One question from Jakarta. Yes, can I speak? One question from Jakarta. First, thanks for inviting us for this very interesting session. One practical point, I hope that we can get a report with all the different presentation of this session. A second point, which was already mentioned from Beijing, is that general characteristics in coastal areas in Asia is the rapid subsidence in coastal areas, which increases flood vulnerability. There has been considerable Japanese experience in dealing with subsidence, and I hope that maybe in a later session or in another process, that experience can be shared with the different cities and countries participating. We from the Netherlands would also be willingly sharing our experience on subsidence and in general flood management issues. In that sense, I think it would be good if the different cities engaged in this discussion in the next session can also explain their different approaches to flood management. Thank you.
Excellent. I think I heard Manila say you have a question.
Yeah, good morning. I have two questions on non-structural and structural, another on structural measures. The first one will be who determines the evacuation standard, and I would like to know what are your strategies to ensure that people really evacuate, because like in Manila or in other parts of the country, people are reluctant to leave their homes even if they are already told to evacuate, such that sometimes we resort to forced evacuation. And my question on the structural measures is that I have seen so many there are many extensive rainwater harvesting technologies as used by Japan for flood control, but I would like to see the technology that would make the use of such rainwater harvested during flooding time. So like, are there now technologies to ensure that the stored water can be used after for any water use? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other? So we've got Philippines and Vietnam. Would you like to have a chance to ask a question? Okay, who's that?
Yes, we have one question from Ho Chi Minh City. First, over the past years, Tokyo in Japan has done a lot of structural and non-structural measures in order for the prevention of inundation. So my question is, for structural measures, how do you get the fund? Does the fund come from the government or from the mobilization of the citizens? And if it is from the mobilization from the citizen, how did you do that? And secondly, in Ho Chi Minh City, we are hoping to have the early warning systems in order to prevent the inundation and flooding in Ho Chi Minh City. During the implementation of the system, we want to get the concentration as well as the involvement of the specialists from Japan, because you have done this before. You have done the mechanism for early warning system. Can you help us with that? So this is the question directly to Japan.
So much.
Can Jakarta have one more question, please?
Wait, let's just give other people who haven't had
Hello.
chance. Bangladesh. Because
Well, I'm from Dhaka, Bangladesh. I have two questions. First one is how Japan managed the river erosion. Also, how Japan managed the flood and river erosion for densely populated areas, and how the Japanese experts looks or have their views on living with flood concept and its adaptation measures. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last country we haven't gone to is, we have Mongolia and Sri Lanka. Mongolia?
Yes, we do have two questions. First is that after you do the hazard mapping, do you also do response mapping? That is the first question. And the second question is, who is the body that is responsible for developing the contingency plan? Is it the ministry or is it the water authority or water bureau that you have mentioned?
Thank you.
Or the research organization? Who is responsible for finalizing the contingency plan?
And Sri Lanka.
Yuka, I think in the first round of the discussion, you directed two of the questions that we had sent. But I would like to ask one more question. That's on the damage assessment. What's the mechanism within the Japanese government to assess the impact of each and every flood event? Whether there is a kind of a built-in system within the line agencies to do the damage and loss assessment basically after each and every event.
So that we don't run out of time.
Yuka.
Yeah. Okay, go on.
Sorry, we have one more question from Land Reclamation.
Hello. So now from your presentations, we have learned a lot about the structural measures we have taken to avoid river flooding, and would like to share your experience. So you may have connection canals to the river, and when the river water level is very high, how do you protect the city from backwater flow and maybe from gates? And also when the high rainfall coincide with the high water levels in river, how do you manage to discharge that flow to the river?
Thank you very much.
Can we have an additional question from Jakarta, please?
Very quickly, we don't have much time, but go ahead.
Yes, this is from Jakarta. One more question, please. Jakarta faces flooding every year involving 13 river basins, which flowing from different provinces and regions outside Jakarta administration. I'd like to ask our colleagues in Japan, how do you coordinate different local government involved in a collaborative governance measures involving not only government agencies but also communities and private sectors? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Another question from Manila.
Okay.
One last question. Just one last question from Manila. Hi. Yes, please. Hi. This is regarding the 2004 Urban Anti-Flood Law. This is very new to us. How long does this law was drafted, and how was this drafted, and whose agencies involved in the drafting of this law? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. All very excellent, very good questions. So what I would like to do is we have 10 minutes. What I'd like to is, I'm sure I'll miss something, but I think there were like about three areas where the questions can be organized into. One is the institution area. So the first question, and I'll let whoever feels best to answer. First question was, okay, so you do assessments. How is that related to the institutions to implement what's assessed? How then, if a disaster does occur, who conducts the damage assessments and how that's done? And your response mapping. How do you do the mapping after, or evacuation routes? How do you do the mapping? And how do you encourage, not force, encourage your communities to evacuate when necessary? Should we start with that? So who would like to start? Maybe to start on perhaps the evacuation mapping and how communities are encouraged to evacuate.
May I? In the case of City of Yokohama, we have the DRM plan, and according to the plan, inside the Yokohama City, as I said, there is a total of 18 districts or 18 wards, and the head of these wards would make a decision as to when people are to evacuate. So it's the job of the head of the ward to develop a manual for evacuation. And as for hazard mapping, according to the law, urban inundation assumed district. Well, if the assessment was made by Yokohama, then the hazard map for the residents would be developed by the City of Yokohama. It is our responsibility at the city level. And evacuation would be up to the head of the district or head of the ward to decide when to evacuate. If I'm wrong, please, Mr. Tachi, please correct me.
Yes, the evacuation, the order or the advice is up to the head of the municipalities. It's legally prescribed. But I can understand the issue of behaviors of people who tend not to evacuate. That's a problem for us also. Even in the big tsunami after the Great East Japan earthquake, lots of people, quite a few people evacuated because they are used to, they know the risks of tsunami. But some didn't because they couldn't understand the hazard or such a big hazard occurred. So it's really difficult task to change the behavior of people, but we are trying to do that through the continuous awareness raising, education and training. And one of the success in the case of East Japan earthquake was the case of Kanamae City, where lots of elementary school and junior high school children evacuated, by themselves. That's because of the repeated training based on hazard map.
And the next, go ahead, please.
I want to add one thing for promoting the local people's evacuation. So nowadays, local governments are adapting the emergency mail service system to cellular phones of each resident. So JMA can send short messages about earthquake alert or tsunami warning to individual cellular phone. And in addition, local governments can send a short message about evacuation order or flood information. So that is one of the effective tools for communicating local people after our experience of 2011 Great East Japan earthquake.
Excellent, thank you. I think we have the same system in Bangladesh as well of using cell phones. So that's excellent. The question about damage assessment, who conducts damage assessments after a disaster in Japan?
Okay, talking about the damage assessment, we have two different kind of damage assessment. Damage assessment after disasters and damage assessment before disaster or prediction damage, possible damage. And the damage assessment after the disasters are done by municipalities and other entities in charge of managing things like infrastructure and so on. And for flood disasters, we have established system to collect such damage data automatically or based on the routine established procedure to collect and send it to the central government to and compile the data. That's an established system for damage assessment after the disaster. And damage assessment before disasters are up to the river managers when conducting projects. We are mandated to implement so-called cost-benefit analysis before a project starts. So in order to get the benefit, we have to assess the possible damage by flooding. So through the procedure, we assess and give information about the possible damage.
Excellent, thank you. I think you raised a very important point where you actually do an assessment beforehand of the potential damages. I think that's something that hasn't been adopted in a lot of our countries. And then just one last question, well, several questions on this, but how is that assessment, is every ministry required to integrate that assessment that's conducted by EMLIT or whoever it is that conducts it into their planning? How does that integrate? Your assessment, your potential flood assessment and hazard mapping into other ministries' planning and activities?
Well, actually, the law requires, the flood fighting law requires municipalities to make hazard map and give proper information to their residents. It's really stipulated by the law. And also the river managers are mandated to give the basic information, like the areas where susceptible to flooding and so on, such information. So, well, basic analysis and provision of information is done by the river managers, like our ministry for big rivers. But some parts of the activities are stipulated in law. But sometimes it's difficult to force the other managers, like the road managers and so on.
So I think that leads us to three questions that were raised about who are these river managers? So it's a integrated system, or is it all under the Ministry of Land Information Technology? Or are they river managers that are in all different levels of government?
Yeah, it depends on the size or the importance of rivers. For large rivers, we have 109 rivers designated to so-called Class A rivers, which are important and large and very influential, and they are managed by the municipality directly. And the middle-class rivers are managed by prefectures. So we designate a single river management for a river system, and we manage the total whole river system, by the single designated manager.
Excellent, okay. And then the big question, who funds all this activities?
Well, for large projects like construction of levees and dams and so on, such projects are funded by central government with some allocation of budget by the local governments, like prefectures. But as I mentioned, we have lots of various different level of activities, not only for the infrastructure development, but also provision of hazard maps and like the systems to send information to local residents. Such systems are funded by municipalities and other level of government. But also we have some subsidy systems to encourage such activities by governments, local governments.
So the cost is shared depending on the size and depending on intervention between the different levels of government. So I know we didn't answer all questions. I'd like to move on to structural questions because there were several structural questions. One was on how does Japan control river erosion, particularly in densely populated areas, and how do you use the flood water that's collected? Do you use a discharge? How do you manage the water? And then coastal issues. So who would like to cover that? Starting maybe with rivers and then coastal areas.
Well, the question is a little bit about technical, but for the erosion, it depends on the characteristics of rivers. But usually, if the flood capacity is small or the big discharge is confined in a small area, the friction or the power to erode rivers became larger. So basic thing we have to think about is to enlarge the river or make enough room for storing flood water. That's not not beneficial for protecting flood disaster, but also to make a sound system of ecology by preventing erosion and something like that. Okay.
Would anybody else like to share the experience, Mr. Tanaka from JICA, about controlling river erosion that you might have experience in, or coastal? Not so much. Okay. So we'll have to leave those questions unanswered. Maybe. Okay.
About the coastal subsidence from Jakarta, I think it's about the subsidence problem, right, occurring in the metropolitan area. And the subsidence occurs because of the pumping up of water for daily life. Actually, Japan has experienced the problem of subsidence when we are at the stage of rapid development of industry. Actually, the low-lying area in Tokyo has subsided quite a big amount. But the one direct answer to that was to find another source of water, tap water. In order to do that, we have developed a lot of dams, and dams for the purpose of controlling flooding, but also to provide urban water to people. So you have the cost sharing of the money for constructing dams from the urban water managers, which comes from the people, and and together we build dams. And that kind of development of water resources, alternative water resources, is a direct, I think, answer to the problem of subsidence.
Excellent. I think we are out of time, but I just wanted to, someone asked, how was the law drafted in 2004? You have this river law. How was that, who was responsible for the drafting of that, and how was it drafted?
Well, actually, the law was mainly drafted or prepared by our government, Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, because we are responsible for the river management all over Japan, or policy development. But as you know, the water covers various range of fields like sewage and city planning and so on. So of course we consulted, but basically it was led by our government, who's in charge of river management.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we didn't get to 2 or 3 questions that some of your the country offices asked, but I'm sure this is just the beginning of a long series of discussions that we can have concerning this topic. So we'll keep that in file, and then we can get the answers later on. So I'd like to really thank all the discussants we've had here today, and thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge. They were extremely, extremely beneficial to us. And I'd like to also thank all the field offices for giving us your questions, and I hope we can continue this discussion further.
Thank you, Yuka, and this is actually precisely the purpose of this initial inaugural event of the Urban Floods Community of Practice, is to facilitate these types of discussions. There'll be a lot of specific issues that are raised. We already have some examples of topics, I think, that were mentioned for future sessions, subsidence and otherwise.